And here we go. So, if you're new to this series, this is a series where I cover people's replays from either campaign or multiplayer and give tips to play better. Alternatively, I'll also save your disaster campaigns if you send replays to my Discord. But for this one, Buse today has sent an Empire Kite playstyle against Khorne. Generally, extremely favored, which means we know something went wrong in this game. Or maybe everything goes right. But we'll definitely be able to give him some support. Some tips and pointers. He has Boris, which is great against the relatively low leadership Marauders, Khorngors. He has the War Wagons. He has some Sterling's Revenge, Free Company. And when you're playing a kite game like this, generally what you want is to make sure, above all else, that you are trading up in value. You don't gotta worry about the capture points. You just gotta make sure that your guys are using their ammunition and that they don't die, which is what has me slightly worried for these Free Company militia. If they ever do get caught up, that's gonna be a bad situation. That's some capture point mindset that you gotta be wary of. But you know, he's getting some shots in at the cultist. Pretty good damage, nothing too much to say there. I will actually, one thing though, at max range, your War Wagons are pretty bad at hitting foot characters. I would generally only shoot at foot characters if they're at like half range, but in this case it's not too bad getting some damage here. There aren't too many high priority targets to focus fire, so you know, totally fine there. Good Boris charge. He doesn't care about a couple of Marauders. Almost terror routes them too, which is pretty nice. And overall, nothing bad, you know. Like, this is just a fine game, you know. He's kiting. He's using his Pistoliers, routes off a unit. Boris gets netted, oh god. Wounded prey. He did mention that there was a little bit of sloppy play with Boris, so he already knows that, you know, you gotta be a little bit more careful with your Lord. But even if you lose your Lord, this should still be pretty winnable. You can see how much damage the Cultists of Khorne has taken. Flesh Hounds are not going to do well against the Demogryph Knights, so honestly, it's still not that bad. Pistoliers even chonking away at the Cultist, pretty nice. Hasn't used a summon yet. He has to be fighting in melee for 2 minutes, so honestly, pretty good. One thing I would say though, these spears should have been ready to defend your Pistoliers. They should be the right distance away to support your skirmishers at every given moment. In fact, this full retreat is really bad. He should be rushing in with his spears because they annihilate Flesh Hounds. That's the first minor misplay, though pretty small overall. They're totally expendable. You just want them to fight large units. A little bit of a capture here is fine. You know, he's slowing down the Marauders, getting a few free pot shots off. I will say a little risky. One Fury or one Dog Summon could probably kill these guys, and that would be a value loss. So while in this case your opponent lets you get value, got to be a little careful there. But overall, pretty good, right? You know, it's a great kite game. He's comfortable with being double capped, and this is exactly what you want when you're playing against people, right? He's using up most of his ammunition. His Pistoliers are in good health. Still a little bit too passive with these spearmen. You can see if the dogs were to charge you right now, they would probably get a bit of damage before your spearmen can support. In this case, the dogs are not plentiful enough to kill the War Wagons, so it's fine. There is a little bit of a value loss, by the way, by not moving up the War Wagons closer. When definitely they have nothing to worry about. They can totally be closer to this guy. You're losing a little bit of value on the ammunition. And a lot of people might look at the gold damage value and be happy. But settling for less can definitely run you into a situation where Khorne has too many units to kill off. But great targeting with Boris. He kills off the Cultists. Overall, pretty good. Little overextension with the Pistoliers. Honestly, you don't even need Pistoliers a lot of the time. But yeah, you can see he's focusing a lot on the kite units, and the support's just like always a little bit too far away. Well, Altdorf Griffites, right? They took a little bit too long to save the Pistoliers, and because of that, they aren't able to get as much value as usual. Cultist is basically gone. He doesn't have to escort it off. He could cycle charge with Boris instead. Demogryph Knights do kill those guys, though, which is nice. You can see that tiny little problem, though, right? Losing the Sterling's Revenge. Pretty expensive range unit to lose. You don't want to lose that guy. I will also comment on the magic. Regrowth is nice, but it's not that important in a kite build, since you're trying to avoid damage anyways. You usually can settle for Burning Head to kill off these units a little bit faster, but overall regrowth is not a huge loss. I would say minor thing to consider, though, because, you know, Boris has regen anyways, though, you know, on the Demogryph Knights is fine. Although if you are planning to heal the Demogryph Knights, you do want to cycle charge infantry as much as possible. Opponent here a little bit slow on the killing here, so he does get punished for that. And overall, Empire is doing great, right? So this, I would say, is now an unlosable position. You shouldn't lose this position. This is pretty good. I will say the spears are still way too far away, man. So they could have captured this point way sooner, because they move at the same speed as the Chaos Warriors, are faster. They would have been completely fine standing here, and you only pull back once they start advancing. You kind of force them to advance with your spears, because if you don't, then you know, what are you doing, right? What are you doing with these spears? You gotta, you know, you don't have to play so far back. It's just infantry. They'll kill cavalry just fine, so no one cares about that. Spears is just for emotional support. Like, yeah, this is like, you know, 1,500 value idling. You can't help it anyway. They are finally advancing, though. Regrowth drops on the Demogryph Knights. They did get caught up a little bit. Boris a little bit too aggressive there too. Usually what you want is you want to keep your wagons by Boris, so if this ever happens, the wagons can focus fire the Skull Taker. Boris does die, but in the end, this should still be really advantaged. Now the spears are pushing up. Okay. So now he's pulling in the spears when he doesn't have wagon support. And this is pretty bad now, because you're using his spears against infantry, and they don't trade that well into infantry. I guess they do have the cavalry support, but this is not the time to be moving them in. They'll be doing their best when they're an anvil for your wagons to support and kill everything. By moving them in now, you basically pick the worst situation to move them in. But hey, you still have a value lead, right? You're still killing off the Corin units. Your cavalry's being way too aggressive, though, right? Imagine, just ignore the tickets, man. In a world without tickets, why would you have ever sent your cavalry on these Chaos Warriors, right? You know, if you just ignore the tickets, it makes so much sense that you would just wait for wagons and then send them in when you have that support, right? You know, you would just wait for your army. But it's always the tickets that get in people's heads, that makes them play slightly more aggressively than they need to be. Corn does not have a lot right now. You have a double cap. You could totally disengage. He does get the disengage with his cav. It's totally fine here. Some Chaos Warriors do lose that fight, which is pretty good. And overall, it's a pretty good fight, right? Corn dogs. A little bit of a sus situation. Okay, I guess he does have his cav support. You can also pull to your infantry. So if you just run your wagons through your spears and countercharge the dogs with your spears, it lets your cavalry get a lot more work done. You know, instead of having them fight corn dogs, they could have circled around and slammed into the back of these guys. They could have gone for Karanak and saved your spears here. You already had spear support to save your wagons. Your cavalry could have saved this situation. So another minor misplay. Enough of those, and it gets a little bit sus. He does resummon his Pistolier, so still has a single point. But you can see now that by playing for points and taking that fight so aggressively, he's actually losing the point even more. He only held the point for like maybe a minute or two, but now all his infantry are dead, and this is when it starts getting a little bit sus. Without infantry, your cavalry are way less effective, your wagons are way less effective, because they can get charged down. So it's getting a little bit sus. And if you just take a look at the situation, what should be going through your head? It should be, I need to kill these units. It shouldn't be, I need to capture this point. Right? So this cavalry unit, I guess they're kind of doing neither. Are they trying to capture this far point? Are they trying to go here? That would be a mighty terrible misplay. Absolutely indeed. I will say the early game was exquisitely played, but now we have some idle cavalry. Oh, yeah, you see that? You see the impulse? It's the fear. It's the fear. He thinks he needs the points. He thinks he needs the tickets. That is not how the kite game plays. So he's trying to slow these guys down, right? He does get a pretty good charge, but these cavalry units are in a really sketchy position. One Minotaur summon, which Khorne does have the points for, right? One Doggo summon to muck them up, Furies. These guys can absolutely get killed, and if they get killed, you're screwed. This Khorne player doesn't take advantage of it, but absolutely it's a risky situation. Minotaurs could have been here. Though the risky play does pay off, he does rout off some Marauders, but he's still going for this point. You really need that infantry over here so that you can win your trades, you know, to stop the dogs from killing your wagons, so that you can clear off the rest of the infantry. It's actually not that much, right? Like, this is not a very scary force. This is 2 half-dead Chaos Warriors and a half-dead Marauder of Khorne. Like, there's nothing going on. The Wrathmongers, sure, right? But they're not actually going to capture the point very quickly. They die to your skirmishers. And by having your cavalry here, they're not really, you know, you're not doing the steel faith and gunpowder mixed forces strategy. Pretty brutal. Khorne uses the unkillable on the Fleshhounds, and now we have a smaller army occupying a larger Empire force, because cavalry alone do not really trade too well. Now, he does, despite all of this, still capture this point with his infantry. It is a tenuous capture, though, because if Khorne did start to win this, right, and it looks like they might, it's going to be close, they can recapture this point really well. What you want are them permanent solutions. You want to permanently hunker down on the middle and just make it where they have no units left. You can see how close this game was to Khorne just running out of units. Like, what does he have? He has Karnak's Skulltaker and like 2 units of infantry at good HP, and I guess the Furies, right? You have like 4 units of spearmen. You have 4 units of cavalry, 4 skirmishers, right? If you just blob together and just were like, I'm gonna wipe this guy off the face of the planet, this would be much easier. Now, I think our wonderful player here, Buse, still wins, but definitely made it a little bit more close than he needed it to be, by focusing on the points. Usually, at least with Khorne, you know, with greenskins, it can be a little bit more sus. But with Khorne, you can absolutely wipe them off the face of the planet. And yeah, by splitting his forces here, you can see how much less effective they are. In the end, though, he still gets a victory. Hopefully this was useful to you, because not every player will be so generous, letting you take your time and play slightly suboptimally there. There were a lot of opportunities where you could have gone more value with your wagons, could have been a little bit more aggressive with your spears, and if you implemented all of that, Khorne would be so dead. Overall, though, very nicely played. Very nicely indeed. You did keep Boris alive in the end. Honestly, you mentioned that Boris was probably one of your worst parts about the battle. It actually didn't matter. If he lives, he lives. You're probably fine. You know, he got a little bit of poke damage on these guys. Much more so, I would say, focus on keeping your army together and making sure you know what your main win condition is.